recognize the gentleman from Maryland, the ranking member of the committee, Mr. Raskin.
And thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Yang, first of all, Section 1 of the 14th Amendment states that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. And then in Section 2, it says that representatives shall be apportioned among the states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state. So obviously the framers of the 14th Amendment understood the difference between citizens and persons, and they used citizens when they meant citizens. They used persons when they meant persons. Doesn't that pretty much settle this bizarrely lingering question of whether or not we should be counting all persons or just citizens when we perform the census?
That's absolutely correct. Thank you for that question. If you look at the text of the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, it counts all persons in the state. And frankly, some of the history, both of the 14th Amendment and going back to the founding of the Constitution, illustrate that they wanted to count the entire population and not simply voters, not simply landowners. And obviously at that point, women could not vote. Obviously children could not vote. So they want to include the entire population. Frankly, this debate also came up in 1929 during what was called the Apportionment Act. That was the only time in Congress after the 1920 census where we did not have apportionment. And in that debate, part of the debate was whether certain people should be counted. And during that debate, the end of the debate, everyone decided that it is still based on all population. But during that debate, some argued that people should not be counted. Specifically, one representative argued that it should count only voters or citizens because otherwise it would include the thousands of unnaturalized aliens. Another representative say that they didn't want to count thousands of Mexicans and Oriental aliens, and that those people would end up somehow giving extra seats to California in that particular case. When they talk about Oriental aliens, I will take that personally because at that time there was a Chinese Exclusion Act, which meant that Chinese were not citizens. Nevertheless, during that time, it was settled that it should still be all population for purposes of the census.
Right, and of course, at various points in American history, the determination to count just voters would have excluded women, Native Americans, today children still, right? So, will you explain this controversy around differential privacy, which seems to be a new one? Will you explain what that means, what the practice is, and then what your response is to your fellow panelists there, and specifically if you would address Mr. Mayfield's last point that I think this is inflating the population of rural communities by falsely attributing people from urban communities to rural communities, which would seem to me to be inflating the numbers in red districts. But
no, thank you for that question. Again, the starting point is that differential privacy was not used at the state level. So,
what it is first.
Sure. So differential privacy is basically the notion that you will inject, some call it statistical noise, but masking data in the census data. Typically you would take a certain piece of data and transfer it to another individual so that you can't identify individual A. Because concern with big tech now, with big data, individual A, if you have enough information both from the census and what is available on the web, you might be able to identify that person, oh, that must be so-and-so who lives on this block. So the concern was we needed to devise a system that would take some of the data, switch it around so that you can't identify that individual. But again, it was not used at the state level. So any argument that somehow a state got less seats or state got more seats because of it is just not.
So where was it used?
So it was used certainly at the lower levels.
What do you mean? You mean at the county or municipal levels?
Right, so at what's called the census block level, census tract level, it was used there. And I agree that there could be concerns about how you use that. But at the end of the day, everyone that's been doing redistricting still uses that data that's available, what's called PL 94.
When the Trump administration administered that or implemented that in the 2020 census, was that the first time it was ever used?
Yes, that was the first time that it was ever used.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, Mr. Mayfield, was your point that we shouldn't be using that anymore, even if it doesn't affect congressional reapportionment, it affects local apportionment in like city council races, county council, things like that?
To clarify, Congressman, it affects all redistricting within a state. So my friend's point is that if Indiana has a population, say, of 3 million, that's probably correct within the normal parameters of accuracy. But how Indiana's 9 congressmen, I apologize if I got that wrong, are allocated is going to be incorrect and down to the legislative and district and town levels. That error will permeate within each state below the state level. When he refers to apportionment, he means the number of representatives that are allocated to each state after the census.
With your indulgence, Mr. Chair, if I could just ask him to finish this point. Well, so why was this differential privacy thing adopted? What problem was it addressing, and what would the alternative be to the problem of not being able to get in particular people's houses if they don't open the door or whatever?
Sure. Well, differential privacy has nothing to do with collection. It has to do with ensuring that Section 9 of Title 13 is adhered to. And in that, Congress has prohibited the release of personal information based on using the data. So in other words, we don't release the raw data, the short form that everyone fills out. That data is very basic. There are basically 9 questions: name, phone number, address, racial characteristic, your relationship to the household head, your gender. The only real personal information on that is name, address, phone number. And so Census has always kept the granular data out of the public eye. So you can't get census data that's actually collected. In the past 3 censuses, 2010, 2010, 2000, and 1990, the Bureau used what's called data swapping. And so imagine you have a block, there are 5 houses on each side of the block. Because the smallest unit of data that is public release is at the block level, the Bureau scrambles that data. So you don't know if there's a 20-year-old living on this side and a young daughter living on this side. But that was always used. There was never a problem with it. And no one outside of the people driving differential privacy thought there was a problem, and they advocated for continuing to use that method.
I think the ranking member first question, and I'm going to use a little prerogative because there's some technical stuff here, particularly when it's a nonpartisan point, so I don't mind it going over on either side, because this differential privacy is highly complex. And I do think this committee, on a nonpartisan basis, we need to understand it and understand it